but
Yeah.
so yeah, I guess I'm wondering exactly how Latin advances grammar, but I suppose it's probably nothing complicated, you know.
I
Yeah.
don't think so.
Um, Maybe we could talk a little bit more about the nature of grammar and how that fits into
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No.
classical
Um,
education as a whole.
Is that
talking
That's
about
the
that.
Ratio Studio One?
No.
yeah.
No. No.
That's too
This.
long.
Oh yeah. Let me send that to you guys while I'm thinking about it. I'll send it to the group. No. 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 This was why I was late letting Julian in because I was looking for this book. No. No. This was a conference that they had a couple of years back, and they collected all the papers.
Hmm.
But it was on. But it's Jesuit education and the classics. It's on that what makes a
Hmm.
classical education and how it
Hmm.
related to Jesuit education, and
Hmm.
some of the papers that were on here. But that's one of the. I guess maybe if you've got questions, Joe, I'll let you guide the discussion. But I was thinking earlier today, maybe just to kick us off, like how do you when you talk about classical education, how do you define that term, right? Because so one of the things that like they harp on in this book and where they talk about like what marked Jesuit education, what they called a classical education was, which you just mentioned, right? You studied Latin and Greek, and it meant that you read the Roman and Greek authors. That was a classical because you're right, you read the classics.
Yeah. See, I
As a
don't think that's
yeah,
good enough.
as opposed to, well, that's what the classical education then meant, right? It was popularized in the Renaissance. Uh,
Disagree.
I don't know.
I'll explain.
Because
So the liberal arts serve a purpose other than reading old shit, and the
that's my
classical.
point
Yeah.
was that there was a distinction between the liberal arts education and the classical education. Now today that distinction kind of gets collapsed, and people just mean kind of everything by either one of those terms. I'm
Okay.
just saying that historically there
So
seems
classical
there's
education
a
just means
distinction.
reading old shit, and
But
then
it was
liberal
marked
arts
by you read,
education.
yeah, that you read the classics. You studied Latin and Greek, and you read Cicero, you read Homer, right? That's what a lot of this is about, right? Which was the kind of education the Jesuits popularized in the late 1500s, early 1600s. That added to the liberal arts.
What did it add to it,
The classics. That was the distinction.
and why was that a good addition?
Well, at the time, at least in that period of the Renaissance, so the Jesuits were all about educating the future leaders of society, right? They were educating the future business owners, politicians, the lawyers, right? The who's who, right? It was the wealthy who could afford to go there, and that was the kids that they taught. And it was because of the Renaissance that kind of it repopularized that fascination with the
Original
ancient authors,
texts,
right?
yeah.
So if anybody who was going to be anybody in that society, you had to know Latin and Greek, you had to know the ancient authors. That was the sign of a refined, cultured person in that time period, and the Jesuits meant to produce refined, cultured people. Right, it was sort of an evangelization thing, right? That you'd go out and have conversations in the secular society, having that sort of education. And everybody then, if you were anybody, you knew Latin and Greek, you read Cicero, you read Homer. And so the Jesuits were like, all right, we're going to teach you to read Latin and Greek, and you're going to be able to take your place in society back then.
So then it only
Like
has incidental value.
it did to them, right? So I don't know. One of you guys correct me if I'm wrong, right? I don't think Thomas ever mentions like the study of Cicero. I mean, he's read Cicero,
Yeah, he
obviously.
mentions Cicero.
I don't know, does he? But like in all of the division of the sciences or the order of learning, I don't think he ever talks about. He certainly, I don't know that he ever talks about like Homer, right, or any of the, or that like that, or that
Yeah.
something like reading the ancient authors that had any kind of right. Like as far as I know, Thomas doesn't talk about that in any of the places where he talks about uh, like the disciplines being taught, right?
Does he cite the? I mean,
Right.
I am sure that when Aristotle is talking about the poets, that in the commentaries on those texts, Thomas is talking about them too, right? Um,
What am I doing? Oh,
so
I'm still looking for.
What would it mean if Aristotle or if Thomas does not talk about Homer?
I don't think it would mean much.
No, I
Yeah.
was but it doesn't seem to be a standard part of education, right? As Thomas is thinking about it, I don't think.
No, I don't. I think that's. I don't think that necessarily follows. Because he could have just not talked about the good of reading Homer because it wasn't pressing. I mean, there were plenty of other issues that were a lot more pressing at the time. I don't think anyone was questioning the value of Homer and Thomas.
Yeah,
One
but
of
I mean,
the other things is that reading Homer would fit earlier in one's liberal arts education.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was meant, for a younger.
Yeah, and so Thomas is teaching, priests, people who he I think would assume and rightly assume that they've already studied the poets.
Right, but there certainly is, at least, a historical reality.
Well, here's a question.
That-
Just to make sure, there were Latin translations available of Homer at that time, right? If there weren't, then that's a pretty big cue that they were not reading Homer. I actually haven't heard of one. I just assumed that there were. Yeah.
Oh, look, it's right there.
Let me look that up. When was Homer translated into Latin here?
Well, look, I mean, I think the real value or the real reason the study of Latin belongs to a liberal education is because it's a really good choice of language for introducing a student into the liberal art of grammar. Joe, you kind of already, I think you're already sort of leaning towards that.
Right, that's what the TAC document said.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's especially necessary for a Catholic liberal education, right? Because this is all in like that one paragraph or two paragraphs or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You enter into you can participate in the sacraments a lot more completely and just into the life of the church more completely than you could before.
And then we could add to it what we've added before, like that when you want to study an author, you really need to read them in their original language so you can get used to how they are using certain terms and you're not relying on translations, right? So you can actually be in conversation with the actual people of history in their own words rather than in the words of somebody else.
Yeah. I wanted to, something that the TAC founding document doesn't really go into is how knowing grammar, especially Latin grammar, can be actually directly helpful for philosophy. So, Joe, you saw like a glimpse of it when you were helping me with OneNote or whatever, but there's that one article by Kevin Long called 3.5 Notes on Grammar in Thomas Aquinas. And the whole point of that article, it's kind of disconnected. It's kind of like 3.5. Well, not really, like 4 articles in one.
Okay.
But each of those sort of mini articles is an instance in which, or meant to be an instance in which grammar, like knowledge of theoretical grammar, can help us to come to a better understanding of like what Aquinas is saying in a given passage. Philosophically. I don't remember all of them. They're all really fascinating, but the one I do kind of remember relatively well. I suppose I could pull it up, but I'll try to summarize it real quick here too. Is that he points out that there's actually 3 voices in Latin. You have the active voice and the passive voice, of course. But then there's also this thing that no one talks about, of course, called the middle voice. And he says that if you account for the middle voice in the first way, you can make a lot more sense of what Aquinas is trying to say, specifically when he says the sentence or the proposition, everything that is moved by another. Right? Because if you look at it just simply from the passive voice, it looks like he's saying something tautological. Right? If something is moved, it seems sort of imply that it's moved by another. So why would he add is moved by another? It's just you're saying the same thing twice. It's redundant. But his point is that it's not in the passive voice. It's in the middle voice. And the idea is that it's the action is sort of neither received it's being received, but it's also a something sort of being done by the subject. And the other example he uses is like the rod, like the iron rod heats. You know, so in English we would use the active voice heats. But the thing that's happening itself is something happening to the rod of iron.
Well, we could also say the iron rod is heated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is that there are instances in which we might say that the iron rod heats.
I'm just not sure I agree with the assessment of the first way, because I've always thought that the problem when he raises the question of whether everything is moved by another is the problem of alleged self-movers, right? Like you and me. We seem to move ourselves.
Hold on. Yeah. Well, let me here. Hold on. This is he explains it a hell of a lot better than I'm doing right now. Right. Yeah. So
Who is the author here?
Kevin Long.
Okay.
So verbs signify according to the mode of action, and passive voice verbs signify according to the mode of passion. Okay, here we go. So the iron heats quickly. Yeah. That's the idea.
Okay.
In the latter case, it's not clear whether another prior external agent is heating the iron or whether the iron is supposedly heating itself. All that is established, so he acknowledges that thing, right? All that is established is that the iron is in some kind of state or condition of progressive and continuous degrees of hotness, independent of any reference to a prior external agent.
Right. Okay.
It's less widely recognized that Latin also possesses a middle voice, although it appears to be seldom used. The same examples may be cited. Okay. Yeah. So at first glance, this proposition appears to contain two verbs in the passive voice, or rather two instances of the same passive voice verb. It appears to mean everything that is moved, passive voice, is moved, passive voice, by another. Therefore, grammatically, the proposition would be redundant and uninformative. However, if the first verb is interpreted as being in the middle voice, the proposition must be read differently. Everything that is moved, middle voice, is moved, passive voice, by another. Or more expansively, for everything which is in the condition of continuously progressive transmutation towards act, there must be some prior external agent which causes it to be in that condition.
I just don't think there's actually a difference in meaning between those two constructions. Probably because my Latin is not very good, but.
Well, this is just based on an understanding of what the voice signifies.
Yeah, but he's saying it must be read differently, and so
otherwise,
the difference in the reading.
Well, because it's saying that,
otherwise, Tom seems to be saying something tautological. No.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I just never read it that way. I always read it as talking about alleged self-movers.
Oh, see, I thought the way that you just read it, it sounded to me like you were saying that if it was in the passive voice, you wouldn't need to. If it is moved in the passive voice, you wouldn't need to say by another. That's what's redundant about it because it's passive.
No, that's not necessarily true. Can the thing move itself? That's the question, I think.
Well, that was the point of it being in the middle voice. It's not passive, it's indeterminate. It's just in that state of.
So passive here has to signify an extrinsic thing. Passive cannot be.
That's what I just heard when Julian was reading. I could be hearing wrong. It's possible.
Yeah, that's kind of that's the sort of the point of the passive voice, right? This is the
Yeah, the passive
That's
voice.
what this sentence is trying to say, right? The active
I
voice
see.
verbs signify according to the mode of action. Passive voice verbs signify according to the mode of passion. So when you put a verb in the passive voice, as such,
Yeah.
Hmm.
you're signifying some external agent.
But the middle voice is indeterminate.
I
And
see.
so you would need to say it's moved by another. It's not it by itself, it's by another.
I guess in English, this is actually only a problem if you're reading it in Latin, because in English, it just means the question is, I think, still the same, whether it's a self mover or if it's totally moved by another. Like when we say is moved in English, I don't think we specifically signify that it's not in any way doing the action itself.
And when you're doing so, you're using the middle voice.
In English, it's just
Yeah.
not as clear. Yeah.
It's definitely
think
not
that's
as
the point.
clear in English, yeah.
Okay. It's not as clear in Latin either, because he's like he's using a passive construction. He's saying we just have to read it in the middle voice, right?
Well, he says in another part of the article that the middle voice actually takes the same forms as the
Right.
voice. Right?
Doesn't it do that in Greek too? You just kind of have to like know that this isn't passive, that it's a middle voice.
Well, the problem is I'm not understanding the significance of this and like why this revelation changes our reading of the first way. Because if I was reading Latin before, and I've read the first way in Latin before, I've never thought of it as tautological. Just as when I'm reading it in English, I never thought of it as tautological. My mind just understands that what we're talking about is something indeterminate.
Might have been that you were just understanding something implicitly that now needs to be made explicit.
Yeah, sure. But I read it in English without that problem, right? And so our task here is to understand why reading it and understanding it in Latin elevates the text, right? Shows us the real meaning that we're missing.
Is it about the fact that it's in Latin? Because I don't know, right? Doesn't the same idea hold for English? That if you're reading that something is moved, then why do you need to add by another, unless you mean to signify something else? Right? Like if something is being moved passively, then something else is moving it. Right? But if you mean to signify indeterminately, then you would have to add it's being moved, but it's not by itself, it's by another.
I guess so, but
I don't know.
what
I'm just trying to understand the idea, and I know you're just questioning whether or not this idea is helpful, right?
yeah, right. Like whether this gives me a reason to teach Latin to kids or not, you know. It sure is interesting. We don't talk about the middle voice much. Yeah, I mean, I know that I've posed this question to Jake before, and he talks about predication, I guess, and I suppose that studying Latin gives you a better sense of, or a better practice of identifying the actual predicate of a subject or something, I guess. The strongest arguments that I ever heard from our conversations were the incidental usage of Latin throughout history and how it just happens to be the most valuable thing for us to study so that we can be in conversation with the wisest minds of our tradition. That always made a lot of sense to me. I know it's not essential.
Yeah.
And I want an essential answer if there is one.
So I'm not really sure. You're sure that there is one, but go ahead.
So I think the whole middle voice thing and I happen to think it is helpful for the first way, because it was something that I, in particular, actually struggled with the first time, when I was a baby freshman or sophomore in college or whatever, and a moron. It was something that just didn't make any sense to me because, it seemed redundant. It seemed tautological, but I didn't realize that is what I was struggling with. And not that this necessarily would have helped with my, again, moronic brain, but at the time, but for me, at least when I first read this, it sort of like dawned on me that that's what I was struggling with at the time. And maybe if someone had explained it sufficiently to me well enough, that I think it probably would have helped.
Well, they could have explained it all in English, right? Like, actually reading it in the Latin here doesn't change our understanding of the text. It's constructed the same way. It's just that we assume that Thomas is not uttering a tautology, and so we reason that he's using the middle voice.
Yeah.
Same in English.
So yeah, it's the same in English. But the point in this article is to show why the art of grammar is necessary for a liberal education, and Latin is a hell of a lot better. Is a hell of a lot better of a way to learn the art of grammar than English, because English has
that's true.
English has almost as many exceptions as it has rules. You know, the endings are sort of, you know, you have to know them sort of on just an independent basis. There aren't like, because in Latin, right, you're for almost every choice that you make in terms of translation, when you're trying to make sense of something, you have to proceed by a syllogism, right? I went through this with my students all the time. Like, okay, we have the principle: if the verb is singular, right, the verb and the subject have to agree in number, okay? And then I show them, all right, what number is this verb? And they say it's singular. Hope at a certain point. And then I say, all right, we know that the subject and the verb have to be in the same number. That means our subject has to be what? Singular. Okay. Where's a singular noun? What are the singular nouns? Right. And then we go through, right, and we basically go through a whole bunch of syllogisms without them knowing it. You can't, like, you can do that to some extent in English, of course, but it's easier to see in Latin because there are fewer exceptions, and not only that, the whole Latin language, just as the Romans were, is extremely structured, and it has a lot of, I don't know. I mean, structure is sort of the best word I have for it. But that article that I put in the chat here goes through that part of it really well, because he talks about some of the differences between Greek grammar and Latin grammar. Greek is, as he says anyway, sort of more fluid and a little bit more sort of poetic. Or it can be anyway, and most of the time it is. But Latin grammar is very like you're staring at the columns of a temple or something. You know?
Yeah, I don't know enough Greek to comment, I guess.
But nonetheless, the second note on grammar here is sort of maybe a little bit clearer as to its helpfulness, because he's talking. It actually goes over something that we've talked about on this podcast before, or on this stream before, right? On the Trinity, what it means by person, and specifically what he means by in recto and in obliquo. It gets translated as directly and indirectly, which is really, really misleading.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're derived from geometry, in which in recto refers to a line at a vertical right angle, and in obliquo refers to a line inclined towards the horizontal. Okay, rectus and then obliquely. And if my understanding is correct, this is actually where the declensions come from. In a certain way, I think. Not necessarily. Well, actually, I think I might be wrong about that. But at least something similar
That's why you're only a semi-professional.
Yeah. With
So, yeah.
this.
This is why we're all teaching in high school, maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
I think something similar arises with the declensions. But in any case, yeah. So the two terms in recto and in obliquo got transferred over to grammarians to talk about the different cases. Okay, I guess maybe that's what I was thinking of, the cases instead of the declensions. But I'm pretty sure something like, I think that's why it's called.
Well, I know.
I'm going back and forth now, but I think that's why it's called declining, because like literally the line is declining.
Okay.
But in any case,
I know Aristotle. I think it's Aristotle talks about. That's why it's called the case of a noun, because it falls from the causes, or at least in Latin where it got translated from the Greek. Right? Why you call it a case? It falls from the nominative.
Yeah.
But,
okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So, I get so in rectus is straight, right? And oblique. I mean, I would say oblique, but yeah, that's kind of I don't know how I would define that.
Yeah.
Oblique is, I know, tangential, kind of off to the side or whatever. I mean, I guess
Well,
I
they're
could
all
understand.
straight. I think rect means upright, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I guess I could see directly and indirectly in this instance, but I also see why you would call it misleading.
Yeah. So in recto, as he says here, refers to the nominative case, and in obliquo to the declined cases, literally any of them: genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative, right? And the point is this sentence right here. Therefore, each divine person signifies a relation as subsisting. This name person signifies relation in recto, and essence in obliquo.
Well, I need to think about that. Wait,
Well,
go
luckily
back.
he thinks about it for you. Well, I was gonna say, luckily he thinks about it for you.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I guess I'll let Thomas do my thinking for me. He's less likely to make mistakes.
St. Thomas elsewhere explains the basis for this derivation. The nominative is the one that is said to be a name principally, for the imposition of the name to signify something was made through it. Oblique expressions, obliquely, of the kind cited are called cases of the name because they fall away, cadunt, from the nominative as a kind of source of their declension. So so Phil, that's your thing right there, right? On the other hand, the nominative, because it does not fall away, is said to be rectus. Okay. So the crux of St. Thomas's argument appears to be twofold. First, that the definition of person consists of two grammatically distinct parts: the part that signifies in recto by means of the nominative case, i.e. the individual substance, and B, the part that signifies in obliquo by means of the genitive case of a rational nature. Second, at least as predicated of God, this is purely a grammatical distinction, since what subsists in the divine nature is nothing other than the divine nature. So if we go back to the sentence here, each divine person signifies a relation as subsisting. This name person signifies relation in recto and essence in obliquo.
I still got to think about that. I mean, Trinity stuff is hard. This is like, I know this is probably a very helpful example for smart people.
Yeah, this is definitely not using the more known to illuminate the less known.
But in any case,
you want to understand grammar? I have an example from the Trinity.
God, that's right. We're going to use God to explain grammar. Okay.
But in any case, right here, I think the second note on grammar here,
like Julian, I just saw your name. I just saw your name, dude. I didn't see him.
You didn't see him before?
No, I didn't know
this whole time.
You didn't get the joke. I literally made that joke like 10 minutes ago.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. That's good. All right.
But I like why it's more helpful, right, to know the grammar in Latin than in English. And not only that, you have to have like a decent amount. Like you have to know like that it refers to this old grammarian thing, this custom that grammarians had at the time.
So let me try and see if I understand where this is going. Well, let me maybe add to it, I guess. Because what we're arguing now is that understanding Latin better helps understand grammar. Okay. So this is what I'm thinking about. When I'm thinking about grammar, I'm thinking about grammar of a language. But I think that's a mistake. Like trivium grammar is not of a certain language, right? It's got to be just grammar, in whatever language.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Okay. So hang on. I'm trying to piece together thoughts. So studying Latin better helps us grasp grammar, which is something over and above any individual language. And the reason that we're saying that is because the laws present in Latin say better make clearer. They make clearer the
principles of grammar.
Principles of grammar, yeah, better than English, right? They serve the purpose better. Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would greatly encourage. I mean, you know what? I might just like pull it up right now. Greatly encourage you to look at the article that I shared in the chat here.
Did you share it just here in this chat?
Yeah,
it's in the private chat for us. Yeah. Were you here, Joe?
Oh wait, that's a Phil article.
Yeah, I sent the one.
Oh yeah.
I sent the one Julian just had pulled up because I don't have it. And I don't
Oh, good. It's a short article too. I like short articles.
You're welcome.
By guest.
Joe can read this during the next meeting he has.
Who is this legendary guest?
Guest? What are you talking about?
It says it's by guest. That's the author. Dr. Guest, I guess, you know.
No, it's this guy, R.W. Livingstone. I don't know why it says guest here.
Wait.
Dr. Livingston, I presume.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on. Okay, here we go. But what does the Latin language itself, its grammar, as well as its great authors have to do with this vigorous and virtuous Roman character? And why should we study grammar in Latin or Greek rather than English or French? No doubt it can be done in the modern languages, but they have certain disadvantages. In English, at any rate, grammar study is artificial. We know the language already and have no real need to dissect it, while in Latin, we must master the grammar in order to understand the language at all. And the study is therefore spontaneous. And if our object is to train exactness of thought, modern languages are far inferior to Latin, which has in a unique degree no
in a unique degree that no modern language exhibits a
logical quality. The Latin here, if nowhere else, was an intellectual. He disciplined his thought. The Latin, as in like the Latin speaker,
the Latin guy.
Oh, okay.
He disciplined his thought as he disciplined himself. His words are drilled as rigidly as were his legions and march with the same regularity and precision. Modern languages, and English most of all, are lax and individualistic in our grammar as in our politics. We are non-conforming, dissenting, lenient to passive resistors and conscientious objectors. We have almost as many exceptions.
Hold up. I got a book somewhere of that I had from my old undergrad Latin class with like Latin excerpts or things that were like found inscribed on walls and stuff like that.
Some of those are pretty good.
Some of them are pretty good. I think a lot of them, if I remember right, it seemed like every single one had some sort of footnote like, yeah, this guy's kind of breaking this rule, or what he really meant to write was this, or something like that.
As the as the street language, right? Like of
Yeah.
the Roman peasants. Sure, I'm sure it had a lot of colloquial uses.
Well, that's exactly what he's criticizing English
colloquial
for. Isn't it? Like
variations.
if you read
But
an
that's the
English
thing.
article,
But
it's not
Latin
going
is
to be
no
this way.
longer. But Latin isn't a colloquial speech anymore. It's not a vernacular speech the way
Okay,
that
I thought he was
English or
talking about
any
Latin
other sort of-
essentially, and not just incidental to our period in time.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
I think you would have to be
I thought that
talking
he was
about it
making
as
an
now.
essential claim as having a particularly
Yeah.
scientific value.
No, I think
right?
you would
He
have to be
says-
talking about it as to us now.
He says it has a logical quality, right?
I mean,
As
yeah,
if that seems to be like he's trying to make an essential predication.
I think the peasants' Latin had just as many colloquialisms
Yeah.
as does your neighborhood ghetto English.
Right.
But
Okay, I think what you're saying is right, Phil, and that's honestly where my mind it goes with it. Like when everybody says, trying to answer the objection that Latin is a dead language, they never say yes, and that's why it's so good.
that's
Right?
exactly why it's John the
I
23rd.
agree. I agree.
John the 23rd in Veterum Sapientia says exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he says Latin is so good for the preservation of doctrine and everything, is because now it's dead and its meaning doesn't change anymore.
Yeah.
It has ossified.
Yeah, I think that's the value of it, really.
It's stuck now.
And especially because the people that we read and the way in which we learn really Latin is from the best speakers of Latin in all of history, right? That really helps. So I think that's the value of it. I really don't like it when people answer the objection that, oh, it's not dead. It lives on in French and in Italian and no. Tolkien is not impressed with your analysis, right?
It lives on in the 15 people who can still speak it.
Right.
Because they've studied it their whole lives. And
that would be interesting about even those 15 people who can still speak it. Like it has to be as ossified even in their construction.
They've got to have new names for things like memes and stuff that didn't exist
This
before,
is true.
Yeah.
What is it? My college, like my college dictionary that has a Latin word for it's not. It's just the refrigerator. And like all those other things, you just have to.
How do they decide where to put the accent marks and stuff? Who gets to make that decision?
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody at Oxford, I'm sure, or something like that. I don't know.
Just throwing darts at the word. All right.
I've always thought the general rule was on the penultimate syllable.
No, I know there's a rule. Yeah.
Like there's a general rule, but I thought it was the penultimate one. So.
That's one of the things I'm most worried about with the Latin classes because, I learned Latin almost strictly through reading and studying books. So like pronunciation, I don't know. In my head, I probably have this mix of classical and ecclesial pronunciation that I just vacillate between.
There's a dude on the internet who's more or less a sort of, like he is one of the quote unquote. I mean, I just threw out the number 15, but he's one of the very few people who can speak Latin, and he has all kinds of videos on pronunciation and stuff that you can look at if you want.
What's his name?
So his what is it? The channel is Polymathy. I don't know.
Polymathy, I would say.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Polymathy.
And he even has like a whole video on like ecclesial versus classical pronunciation or whatever, or as it's actually apparently as the name is restored classical, which I think is basically just our guess as to how the Romans pronounced Latin, more or less.
From what I hear from some of the philologists that I know, the word study people that I know, they want to argue that that it's more than just a guess. They're pretty adamant about either through I forget the arguments they've made because it's the stuff I don't really understand, so it doesn't stick with me. But according to the tools they think they have in meter and the songs that have survived or whatever.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
They're like, we have the tools to kind of decipher this, I guess. And okay.
Yeah. I guess I'm being.
I don't like it. I prefer the ecclesial pronunciation.
Yeah.
The only thing, the only thing that really it gets me. Like I start twitching. Are the English speaking Latinists when they do like sanctus instead of
Right.
sanctus, and I can't deal. Like I short circuit. Yeah, I can't. I short.
Ray, no.
It's like you have to at least try. Come on.
Yeah, at least throw like a Spanish accent or something in there. Anything but an English accent.
Anything but an English accent. Please do French. I don't care. Just that's the only thing that gets to me is when people use an English accent on it. And I can't deal.
Yeah.
I can't even, as they would say.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, funny enough, this guy Polymathy, as far as I know, he's not Catholic, or at least he doesn't like say in any of his videos whether he's Catholic or not. I don't think he is. He very well could be. However, in his classical versus ecclesial pronunciation video, he does assert that, at least in his opinion, ecclesial pronunciation is prettier, right? It's more beautiful.
Yeah.
Of course it is, right? God gave us that pronunciation.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Drop down from heaven and everything.
That's right.
Jesus Christ himself taught the apostles ecclesiastical Latin.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, and basically what I tell people, because I'm the Latin teacher, right? This was almost like the second question that people would ever ask me whenever, at parent-teacher conferences or whatever. It's like, well, what do you prefer, the classical or the ecclesial pronunciation, right? Because that's the only thing about Latin that I know.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to get you. Yeah, sit at your table here. So let me.
Yeah, and granted, they mean well, and I don't like hold it against them or anyway. I'm not trying to make fun of them.
Yeah.
But what I always say is, like when it came to pronunciation, it was a lot like English, right? Like people in Boston are going to pronounce English way different than people in Texas, right?
Got to pack your cat in the caput.
Yeah. So like, so the ecclesial pronunciation and the classical pronunciation, right? You're not just dealing with different regions, but now you're dealing with different time periods as well.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, based on the extremely little research I've done on this, ecclesiastical pronunciation is based on how the Italians
That's it exactly
pronouncing Latin at the time that like the church was starting to.
Yeah, there's no question about the Italian accent and the Italian pronunciation. That's exactly the way ecclesiastical Latin is. That CI or any of the C and a soft vowel making the ch sound, that's an Italian thing.
What's really weird about that, though, is because you would think that the classical pronunciation of the Latin language originating in Rome would also then be the same. Like now I'm wondering where the classical pronunciation comes from. My Discord is ringing. The boys are trying to get together. All right, there we go.
What was the other one I was? Oh, well, that's interesting too. Some of the medieval manuscripts you can even find that have the spelling variations. Instead of the AE diphthong, it's just the E, because that's how they would, instead of the classical pronunciation would say I.
Mm-hmm.
But the ecclesial just makes an A, and it's what's funny in some of the medieval manuscripts, it's just spelled that way. The A is just gone. It's just an E.
Yeah.
I've
seen that.
That's interesting.
But
yeah, it's like you can see like the evolution of the laziness, right?
Yeah,
it started out as A and E, and then at a certain point they just like stuck them together.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and then at a certain
point,
you know
what I mean. Yeah, I put a few letters in there. You can guess the rest.
Yeah,
and those are the real where it's the real medieval manuscripts where it's just everything is shorthanded. It's like the first letter in a period, like that's it. You're like, you know what I'm getting at? Yeah, totally, absolutely.
Yeah, we bitch about that, and then we're like BRB, LMAO.
Whereas on the other hand, Saint Augustine got like beat with a rod anytime he didn't pronounce his H's.
Yeah, that's right. That's my plan for this next semester, bringing the rod out.
Yeah, every time I'm like singing in a choir and they tell us to say Hosanna instead of Hosanna, I think of Augustine and him getting beat with a rod
Smacking the
because
rod. Yeah,
that's
right.
or at least my like choir director getting beat with a rod for telling us to say Hosanna.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. Like some of the times where they're like, no, here you're supposed to drop the H, but here, like in Miki, it's supposed to be like a K sound. And you're like,
Yeah, that I have no idea
okay.
where that comes from.
Yeah.
Is that the ecclesial pronunciation or the classical Miki?
I think that it's certainly an ecclesial. All the ecclesiastics, it's a
Is
Miki.
it?
It's
Okay.
a
See
K.
that's one of the things. That's where in my head I would never pronounce it that way.
Yeah,
Even though I think of myself as an ecclesial pronunciator.
that's right. Yeah.
Ah, well, I'll just try not to speak much.
I mean, just like listen to the polymathy dude.
Yeah,
Do your own practice or whatever.
right. Yeah, I got my Collins. I've been getting
Mm.
started with again, so I'm sure he'll remind
Yeah,
me.
there-
Yeah.
There he is down there.
And also, right, the other helpful thing is the macrons.
Mhm.
It can be helpful. So I didn't do this last year, and maybe I should have, but to teach macrons to the students.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was going to do that either because I learned without it.
I did
here.
too.
Bowler,
Yeah.
I think, told me you really don't need these. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and in fact, you're not going to find them when you're reading
No,
a lot of the old
that's
text.
the other
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, like even like the Roman Missal and the Breviary, like they just quit. I know
Right.
ink was like a rare thing, I guess, back then and all. But yeah, they just even the monks copying. There's just no. They're like, we don't need that.
Right.
Well, so you like, yeah, in a lot of different texts you won't see them, but macrons are not like they're not like a modern invention or anything. We see like there are Roman inscriptions where guys put little tick marks over certain vowels. So it's not like it's not something that moderns sort of made up to help with pronunciation or anything. But my point is just that, Joe, right? If you learn the macrons, and you will like by learning it with them,
Does Henley
that
use
can help with
macrons?
pronunciation too. What was that?
Does Henley use the macrons?
Yes, I believe
Okay.
it does. Yeah.
Well, then we're just going to follow the textbook. So
Yeah.
it's supposed to get in tomorrow. So
Yeah, I learned without them. Even I think Collins uses them, right? If I remember correctly. But I remember even like my professor when I first started
yeah,
Latin.
he does.
Yeah, but when I was in the seminary and we used Collins, and our professor was like, I don't care about the macrons. So, okay.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
never had to-
my high school Latin teacher didn't give a shit about macrons.
Yeah, it's like nobody I know that teaches Latin uses the macrons, but they're in the books.
My old undergrad guy did use the macrons, but
Yeah.
that's it.
The only time that we ever learned like a macron for its importance is what is it? Oh, the infinitive of the second and third conjugation, right? Monere versus dicere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But in any case, polymathy actually also has a whole video on macrons. So
Yes.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
yeah, he's pretty great. He has videos of him just like speaking Latin to Italians and seeing how they react.
I think I have seen that guy.
Yeah.
Because I think
I've showed that video to students, and I don't know. I think they thought it was like mildly entertaining. And then
at least Julian was entertained, and he was projecting that entertainment on the student.
Yeah. He also has a video, interestingly enough, of him talking to people at the Vatican in Latin and seeing how they react. And surprisingly, there are a lot of people who like respond to him in Latin. He like asks what their name is, and they say, "My name is blah blah blah," all in Latin. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That at least some seminarians somewhere still learn Latin to an extent enough to be able to like say, "My name is blank."
Well, the funny thing is, as I was reviewing all this this week. That's all those basic conversations. Oh, how are you? Where are you from? What's your name? The things that Thomas never ever writes. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
I
yeah.
do not remember this. Like,
That's right. Where's El Bano in the
yeah.
Well, that's what was really fun. And there's a part of me. So, like, when we teach Latin here at the Collegium, like, it's taught as a spoken language. So, like, from freshman year, like, it's like, even in the classroom,
Yeah.
Ed teaches the class in Latin, and he does a lot of practice to make sure he can get that. But there are lessons like in the textbook on like how to go to the doctor's office in Latin, and there's a part of me that's like, I don't think you need to know that.
Yeah.
Like, I need you to be able to read Thomas Suarez. That'd be fun, Bellarmine in Latin. I need you to read Thomas in Latin.
Actually,
Some other stuff would be
Or
cool,
like,
but like I don't,
or like encyclicals and
yeah, like
stuff
I
like
need
that.
you. Well, that's not directly relevant to me. But,
Oh yeah.
like when I teach philosophy, so like I need them to be able to read Thomas. Yeah, the encyclicals for theology. Yeah, definitely.
Well,
Like,
it's
I
not
don't
like the
think
encyclicals start with mihi nomen est papa
Right.
Leo.
But it's like I don't think you need to know how to like go to the doctor in Latin. Like I get it. Maybe that's fun, but like the donde está el baño, that's not useful. But
yeah, because if we remember the purpose, right, which is in Julian's article, was pointing out, it's to learn the art of grammar in a language that's well suited to it.
Yeah.
So like, I think the conversational stuff. I heard that if you really want to learn Latin for its own sake, like you got to be able to think in Latin.
Yeah, and I get it, and
that to do that, you got to practice the conversation, right?
And that helps make it stick. I get that. Like, I'm not disputing it. There are parts of it I'm like, maybe you could skip that chapter. But
well, what something I've been thinking about this week is like, I don't have Henley yet, but I assume that it's going to be the more systematic. Like, you're going to memorize how these nouns decline, how these verbs conjugate. You're going to be able to just spit those back out, right? As opposed to like lingua latina, which is the more spoken. I'm learning this in the same way that a child learns a language, right? Mm-hmm. And I suspect that lingua latina completely fails to do what we want Latin to do in the liberal arts education. Because you might internalize somewhere like the laws of Latin, but you would not become aware of them, right? And so they wouldn't actually do what we want the study of Latin to do in the liberal arts education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the guy who writes the lingua latina thing, I think in the what is it, the answer key or the anyway, like the teacher's edition or whatever, which I also have, he mentions that you should not go through, like the student should not go through lingua latina without an aid, without some kind of tutor there with them, right? It is like ideally you would have someone there to like kind of fill in the gaps of the grammar and stuff. But even besides that, I would say that just based on what I remember, he's kind of able to get through a lot of the principles of the the fundamental concepts in grammar more than you would think. But then again, like I said, or like as you were saying, right, it's still not as explicit,
right,
as as you would see it in like Wheelock or Henry or whatever else.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think there's a definite difference, I think, in trying to teach Latin systematically and then trying to teach it, though, like Joe, you were saying, the way a child would learn it, right? Because children don't learn languages systematically, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like but learning Latin systematically means you have to master the grammar first, right? You have to learn cases, declension, moods, voices, tenses, whatever, right? But the way that a child learns a language, they wouldn't know that until like after the fact, kind of.
Okay. So, having stated all this, I think I made a remark over the weekend thinking about how to teach Latin and thinking about what it is about learning a language that makes a child driven to figure it out, right? And I mentioned that the child wants to learn his vulgar tongue because he wants to participate in the community, right? And I was thinking about this in order to think about how might you guide students through Latin in a way that can continues and cultivates wonder rather than just makes it a chore, right? An exercise that makes them hate coming to school. So the way I might have sold this before the conversation here, and I might still sell it this way, is that the great minds of history that we want to enter into conversation with and learn from spoke Latin, and we want to speak to them, right? We want to be part of their community. But what we've said is that it's a little bit more than that, right? We want to learn the art of grammar so that we can really master logic, so that we can then really master the sciences. But maybe that's like, even if you could sell that in such a way that, I don't know if you can sell that in a way like, hey, you get a student, a ninth grader, and you're trying to say, oh, don't you want to be a great astrophysicist or a great philosopher? Well, Latin is the first step. Like, that's a very remote connection, right? It's not in any way like going to spur them on. Whereas you might be able to get them interested enough, and perhaps are already interested enough in historical authors, right, that wrote in Latin. Maybe they've been exposed in their other classes already. In which case you could say that to really meet these people, we need to be able to speak their language because they can't learn ours, right? That might be a little bit of something, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, how could one conduct this class that does not just become a dry and rote exercise, but that it's actually, I don't know.
Yeah. I honestly, like, I think at a certain point, the roteness is sort of inevitable to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And you just kind of have like it, but really, like, the roteness is really only present in the beginning, and the idea is that, like, once you push through the beginning, then you can start to actually enjoy the Latin language, and you can start to like do the real stuff that you did all the hard stuff in the beginning for.
Right, because I think let me see if I understand you. Would this be something like the satisfaction that a child enjoys when they can first communicate with somebody? That is, understand what's being said to them and perhaps speak back. Like, that's the sort of reward system that we're building on here.
Yeah, or something similar. Yeah. How to do it? I mean, like, is there a way to get them to enjoy the rote stuff? I don't know.
I don't think so either. But like,
not.
But think about it this way: like, that's present everywhere. It's not that we're trying to eliminate the roteness. Like, when you are really driven to figure out the answer to a question, like I am about international law, I've got a long ass bunch of rote work that I've got to do to get that done. Right?
Yeah.
There's no way around that. There's nothing that's going to make, reading the 50th footnote on a long article something that my heart is just pumping for, But it is just about giving them the reason for it, because that's the big objection you always get from schooling or from kids who have been schooled, is that to them it was nothing more than a hoop to nowhere, right? They had to jump through a hoop that somebody said they had to jump through so they could get some degree which is completely unrelated to the hoop, right? Whereas we want to at least indicate what the reward is on the other side of the hoop. There's nothing that makes getting through the hoop, I think, any different. It's always going to be the same work. It's just a matter of, do they understand and see the value of the work, or do they not?